Welcome. We're here with our very special guest, Bob Knight, who I've known since 1991, 92 at the Heritage Foundation. So that's when we were both young. Now we're old, or I'm old. I don't know if Bob ever gets old. I'm going to read you from the back of his booklet here that's come out. Bob Knight is an author, commentator, a regular weekly columnist for the Washington Times. And I get his column. It's always interesting. And townhall.com, I don't think so anymore, right?
No, Town Hall kind of pushed me out.
Yeah,
To the
okay.
truth.
He
Yeah.
sells senior positions at Family Research Council, the Heritage Foundation, the Culture and Family Institute, Concerned Women for America, and the Media Research Center. Bob has written more than 5 books, co-authored 2 others, and appeared on every major broadcast and cable talk and news program a few years back. Recently, I haven't seen as much of you as I used to. The book
Well,
we're
that's
talking
that's before the forces of sexual deconstruction pretty much took over the network. Said you can't advocate against certain lifestyles, and if you do, we just won't see you anymore. And that's pretty much what happened. I mean, I used to debate on college campuses. I did do all the major networks. I was on CNN all the time. And the last time I was on CNN was when I defended the Boy Scouts after they won their Supreme Court case back in, what was that, 2010, something like that. Of course, we know how that went. Scouts themselves caved and overturned their own common sense policy
and
in
went
2015.
bankrupt, but there's some things that are more
And
important
now
than
they're
saying
bankrupt. Yeah.
So this
I
is the
tried to
book.
warn them.
This is the book by Bob Knight.
Yeah.
It's actually a booklet. It's very slim, easy reading, and I think it's very, very useful. And I'm not going to say its name. This is going to be like an Old Testament thing here. So you can read it, and we'll see what happens here.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very good book. And I will say the subtitle, Responding with Truth and Grace. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. This book is from 2018. Oh, I didn't even realize it was so old. I thought it read like it was something new. But in any case,
Larry, I just read it. It holds up.
yeah,
I
it
mean,
holds up.
it really does.
Chapter 1 is on the biblical view of hate and love. Chapter 2 is on miscasting Christians. Chapter 3 is on ridicule to genocide. Chapter 4, hate crimes, what were you thinking? Special insert, racial hatred, no match for God's love. Chapter 5, deploying hate as a political weapon. Chapter 6, the rise of cultural Marxism, with an insert on rules for radicals. Chapter 7 on the SPLC, trading in hate while pointing a finger. And Chapter 8, responding with truth and grace. And I think this is the main thing. There are 2 quotes from the Bible that start it. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And that's Proverbs 15:1. And dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. And that's from 1 John 3:18. So this book has a biblical basis. And I think you're taking biblical principles and trying to say, how can we apply them in the difficult circumstances we find ourselves in today? And I think it'd be useful for people to know, how do you respond to truth and grace in these times when people are being canceled, when they're being censored, when they're being fired, when they're sometimes being jailed, when they're being denied their bank accounts or their credit cards or boycotted and so on? How do you advise people, Christians or non-Christians, to respond to charges with truth and grace?
Well, first you respond firmly. You don't just become a doormat. That's when Jesus said turn the other cheek, he didn't mean become a doormat. He meant respond to taunts and ridicule with peace and not responding in kind, but responding in truth and love. And the truth sounds like hate to a lot of people today. That's one of the problems. But we can't control how people talk to us. We can only control our reaction to it. And the biblical admonition to respond with a soft word uh, doesn't mean to back up. You know, being meek doesn't mean to be a wimp at all. It just means don't be a jerk like they are. I learned this once at the Memorial Park when I was at an Orioles game with my kids, and this woman behind us was yelling profanities like crazy. And I just turned around and I said, ma'am, would you mind? I've got two small kids here. And she let loose another flow of them. And I thought, okay, if I respond to in my humanness, I'm going to fling it back at her. How dare you? But instead, and I believe led by the Holy Spirit, I said, okay, ma'am, well, that's your liberty to do so. I was just asking you, hoping you would respond. And then I turned around, a very soft answer, but it convicted her. Suddenly the profanity stopped. She ended up doting over my kids. She became a different person because she expected me to fling it back at her and be just as hateful. I wasn't. I wasn't a wimp. I made it very clear how I stood, but often a soft word will turn away wrath. I've debated many left wing activists, and they've been surprised that I didn't return the vitriol. I didn't bend my position at all. I always told the truth, but I didn't. I don't have to fake not hating them because I don't. No, that they're full of hate. A lot of the left wing activists, and so they project their hatred onto the rest of us who don't agree with them. We don't have to go along with that. And I advise anyone who is in a vociferous debate in public with anyone, be firm, be loving, be truthful, and let the chips fall. It
Well,
works.
that's very good advice. Sometimes it's not that easy to do. You've got to really be able to keep your cool. I want to talk a little bit about the cases in this book. One of the cases in chapter 7 was about the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was sued by D. James Kennedy Ministries, essentially for defamation, for calling them a hate group, when they said, look, we're a Christian church, these are our beliefs. And it's not honest to call us hateful. You're actually acting with willful disregard for the truth and with malice because you hate us. Went to court, they lost.
Yep.
They appealed, they lost again. You just told me the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. What kind of precedent do you think that sets in terms of discouraging hateful behavior?
Oh, it's a terrible precedent. The court should have taken up the case because this is no small thing. When you're accused of hatred, the way the Southern Poverty Law Center defines it, that bars access to things like the SMILE program, the Anthem charitable program, where people can donate part of their payments for products that go towards certain charities. They just blocked out D. James Kennedy Ministries, and they blocked out any group that the Southern Poverty Law Center says is a hate group. Same with federal revenue sharing programs, where part of the paycheck of the federal employee is put into a charitable fund. You can designate the charities you want. Well, if you're blocked from participating in that, that's another big faucet turned off. So this has very real implications, and it's not just hurt feelings. They've damaged D. James Kennedy Ministries. They've damaged Family Research Council, Alliance Defending Freedom, any number of conservative Christian groups that are designated as hateful merely for upholding God's standard for sexuality. The group's very honest about defending marriage as the union of a man and a woman. They all oppose any sex outside marriage for that reason, and that's hate to the activists.
Well, let me ask you a question about this, because that's not the definition of hate in any Webster's I've seen. The issue becomes a little broader because I was brought up in a time when, the worst thing in the world was the blacklisting of communists during the Cold War, the McCarthy period. And I went to film school. You're from Los Angeles, and the Hollywood 10, and there were so many movies about it, and The Front with Woody Allen, and so forth and so on. It was considered the worst thing you could do to blacklist someone because of their beliefs. Now what we're finding out is that there is blacklisting going on right now. And there was a magazine called Red Channels, which published lists of communists. And now apparently this organization you mentioned publishes lists of hate groups. And then those groups are used to deny people, those lists to deny people the right to make an income. They're de facto blacklists.
Absolutely.
And so you have institutionalized blacklisting being used by government and the private sector now. And yet, no one seems to be against the principle of blacklisting anymore. How did that change take place?
Well, the the people on the far left took over the institutions that convey cultural values. You're familiar with Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist who answered the charge that, gee, the workers didn't revolt after the Russian Revolution in 1917. Why is that? He said that's because the people weren't ready for it, especially in the West. There wasn't a workers' revolt. So what we have to do is take over all the institutions that transmit cultural values. That would be academia, Hollywood, even corporate America. Uh, any institution that has that kind of clout. And that's what they've done. They certainly took over big tech. And I don't think it's too hard to do because big tech really originated in Northern California, which is already very, very leftist.
Let me stop you
But
there.
yeah,
But Bob, I remember, because I had a little bit to do with the first dot-com bubble. And at that time, big tech was considered libertarian,
it
which
was.
wouldn't be the same as Christian, but certainly, in fact, I invested in YouTube when it just started. I bought stock in it before it was bought out by Google, precisely because their policy was anyone could put up anything. And if you got an audience, it was up to you. There was no editorial control. And that no longer clearly is the case. But big tech at the outset presented itself as a libertarian island, not as a left-wing censorious situation.
Yeah, it was said to be the antidote to the mainstream media, which had been liberal for years. And we thought at last we have other conduits to get out information that the mainstream media would suppress. And instead, they turned into suppressors themselves. And we know
Bigger
that Google,
suppressors,
pardon?
bigger suppressors. I mean, they're the
Oh,
ones that's coming out now with these Twitter files that Elon Musk has released, which seems to be the tip
yeah.
of the iceberg, where any member of Congress could say, I mean, in the old days, a politician would call up an editor and say, look, I don't want you to report this. It's bad for us or something. They go, oh, well, we'll consider that. And maybe they would, and maybe they wouldn't. But here it was like all on autopilot. They got a request and they did it.
Yeah, Twitter, Facebook, Google, Instagram, they're all of like mind, and they all did whatever the leftist administrations wanted them to do. I bet it goes back to the Obama administration, actually. I think we're going to find out that it runs far deeper than we have been led to believe up to this point.
But some of this was happening in the Bush administration. I mean, in the, well, maybe, I don't know about the Bush, but in the Trump administration, he was the president.
Well, yeah, he was. Well, I don't believe the Trump administration was telling big tech to censor conservative
But
content.
his FBI and Department of Justice and CDC and FDA were.
Okay, there were rogue agencies, is what you're saying. It wasn't.
They're all
that
rogue
they were.
agencies. So who was running?
Yeah, but now they're in
who was
lockstep with
running
the
the
Biden.
Fed? Well, now, but who was running
Okay,
the
but
federal bureaucracy to do that? In other words, these guys weren't acting on their own because, you know, if you don't go along with us, well, we'll come after you on antitrust. We'll come after you on EEOC. We'll come after you on environmental violation. You know, they got a million ways to come after you. And if you're good, we have all these subsidies, and you're going to get this DARPA money, and you're going to get this NIH money, and you're going to get this money and that money, and we'll take care of you. So there's a squeeze play, but nobody said, sorry, we're not for sale.
no, I think they feel vulnerable. The federal government is no small thing. It can create havoc if it wants. And you're looking at rogue agencies, even during the Trump years, the FBI and NSA and Homeland Security. They all had their agenda. And, this is what is characterized as the deep state. And the liberal media have tried to portray that as sort of a fever dream of right-wing activists, but it's very real.
Let me
And
stop you again. I'm old enough to remember the 60s. The same time they're saying they were against blacklisting, they were very critical
Yeah.
of the CIA and the FBI and the federal government in general. I remember a lot
That's because
of
they were pro-American at the time. These agencies were pro-American at the time. Now they become pro left wing, however it manifests
So
itself.
what you're saying is the supposed principles of the left were not principles at all. They were merely tactical positions used to achieve power, which once you're in power, you drop like a used condom, say.
That's quite an analogy, but it's probably spot on. They do. They'll say and do anything because they're not bound by eternal rules of right and wrong, a transcendent moral system that says lying is bad. No, their moral system is whatever works to advance the agenda by any means necessary. I mean, Marx preached that. Lenin developed it in his system in Russia into the Soviet Union. And it's been the Marxist way of advancing their agenda ever since. In fact, it began way before, in the French Revolution, when there was an anti-God, anti-church revolution at its heart. They installed a goddess of reason in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. They killed priests, and we know they chopped off heads of anyone who was politically incorrect at the time. That philosophy um, was developed through Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and other socialist thinkers. And what really is something that doesn't get brought out often enough is that at its heart is the sexual revolution. They want free love. The left has been preaching free love ever since the socialists of the 19th century rose up. Because if you preach free love, you can damage marriage and the family, and then the church, which is supported by families. And if you can get them out of the way, you can build the state as a new God. The individual has nothing to stand between him and the state, not those little lifeboats of civilization that Edmund Burke talked about. Yeah, that the left is still at war with marriage and the family. And this whole uh, agenda leading right up to Drag Queen Story Hour is all about just destroying the moral order to pave way for the new socialist order.
Okay, I'd like to come back to the main point is how then do you
Yeah.
respond with truth and grace when you find yourself in this situation? And I would actually differ with you because I actually think the Marxist regimes, once they consolidate power, become extremely puritanical, whether in Russia or China. Cuba persecuted homosexuals.
Well, like you said,
Know,
they drop the pretense once they get complete power.
they just use it because, oh, this sounds good to
Yes.
people. And then once
And it
they're in,
undermines their enemies. Their enemies are the forces of liberty and the church and observant Jews who don't want to go along with this stuff.
but
It
for
undermines
instance,
all that.
the libertarians might be for the sexual revolution because, hey, anything goes. But that's a
They are.
temporary alliance. Isn't that how they took over tech? And then they squeeze out the libertarian. Like if you look at somebody like Scott Adams or something, the libertarians
Yeah.
have all been flushed. I mean, I don't know how Elon Musk is going to survive, but the libertarians sort of were open. You could be a Christian or you could be a communist, fine, no problem. But the non-libertarian says, no Christians allowed.
Yeah, exactly. And now the big-hearted, open-minded libertarian really doesn't have any clout anymore. There's no place for them.
And how do you think that
And
happened?
that's because there's a clash of worldviews. There's very little gray area anymore. You're either defending the moral order or you're attacking it. Okay. A lot of people would love to stay in the middle and just say, look, I'm neutral. But no, you can't be neutral between the fire and the fireman. Okay. You're on one side or the other.
Okay, but
And if
now let's
people
get back
say,
to your
hey,
theme. Yeah.
yeah,
How do you then respond to that with truth and grace? If someone's setting you on fire,
well, first you put the fire out, whether it's bad words or, just, aiming at institutions, you do confront the immediate damage, but you do so in such a way that it doesn't compound it or look like a carbon copy of what they just done to you.
so you
You know,
don't fight fire
I've
with
just
fire, you fight
no,
fire with water.
yes, yes. It's like fight hate with love. I mean, it's the same thing. I can't tell you how many times, Larry, I've debated activists, really hardcore left wing activists. And they're always amazed that I don't hate them, because they have great hatred for me. I mean, I debated Barney Frank several times. One time I debated him on CNN. And I remember afterwards, I tried to talk to him. I said, in fact, for those of you watching and don't know, he's a gay congressman from Massachusetts, very influential, very powerful. Um, and I was debating him over something or other. And afterwards, we stand in front of the elevator and I tried to talk to him. I said, Congressman, we don't agree on a lot, but, and then I wanted to connect with him. He looked at me like he was going to slug me. And when the elevator opened, he jumped inside and pushed the button and wouldn't let me come in and said, It's personal. You get it? Personal. Okay, it's personal. In other words, we can't agree to disagree.
Okay, so
He's
now we're
saying that,
back to your book. So how do you
right.
respond to that?
Well, I wasn't able to because he closed the elevator door, but I would have said, Congressman, I have no animus toward you personally. And we're supposed to love everyone, but that doesn't mean we don't love everything people do. And it doesn't mean we should stop proclaiming the truth about what helps people and what hurts people. I happen to oppose certain behaviors that I think are injurious
Okay, but
and immoral,
let's just stick to
and you
this
don't.
issue of how to respond. So how do you respond to somebody who doesn't want to hear what you have to say, who will literally close the door in your face?
Well, you could knock again, or you could do what Jesus told his followers to do when they tried their best in a particular village in the Holy Land. And when they wouldn't listen at all, their minds were totally closed. He said, Shake the dust off your sandals and move on. And, you sometimes have to. There are people with minds so closed that they're not going to open to you. They might open to someone else. And that's why Jesus said, love your enemies, pray for them. I do that all the time. I pray that their minds are opened to other points of view, to God Himself, to the light from above. I say, Lord, please touch them with your love and light and truth, because I apparently can't. I just I upset them, but uh, you can get through to them when I can't,
What do you see
and
happening to
often
our
it's through other people.
what do you see happening to our society, which you could argue went from basically a Protestant society, which valued protest, which realized there'd be many different denominations that had to be tolerated, to
Mhm.
what seems to be, based on what you say, a closed society where people know the one truth and don't want to hear anything else, don't want to consider any other alternative.
Well, because it isn't a truth. They've embraced a lie, and to protect a lie, you have to tell many other lies, and you also have to suppress the truth. The truth doesn't need protection like that. It has power all its own. That's why I'm confident when I go into these debates with leftists, because they might be better debaters than I am, but I have the truth. Really believe that. And they in their hearts know that's the case. And that's why they get so upset often. They get angry when people don't agree with them.
But Bob, now they've moved beyond. I mean, maybe you still have debates. I haven't been able to debate anyone in years. And I have to say, it wasn't as good as you about turning the other cheek. But the new thing is no platforming, canceling, banning, getting people fired. I mean, how do you have any sort of interaction in that kind of situation?
Well, in some situations you don't have interaction. You're in a mud wrestling match, and the best you can do is two things. One, don't stoop to their level, but use every defense available to you. That's why it's important to build an alternative culture. That's what has happened with schools. Schools are rotten. They are compromised. The leftists took them over with the teachers' unions. They're peddling nonsense. They're peddling anti-U.S. history. They're peddling sexual dysfunction. they're poisonous. And a lot of parents know that because of COVID, and they got to see online what their kids were being taught. And that's why we have 10% homeschooling now instead of 2%. I mean, it's exploded. Christian schools are coming up and other private schools. But you build an alternative culture. But I warn people that you have to do more than that. You have to confront the powers that be, because there are lots of people still in that school culture that are being lied to every day, and they're growing up and they're going to be more easily fooled than others and
Plus,
manipulated.
you're still paying taxes for public schools, even if you
Yeah,
don't use
yeah,
them.
that's true.
I
Every
mean,
taxpayer
how do
has
you
the
deal
right to
with that?
speak out.
How do you deal with that?
Well,
I
look at the
mean,
school board meetings. Their parents are rising up, and there've been takeovers of school boards by conservatives, most prominently in Miami-Dade County, largest school district in the nation, now run by conservatives. But I'm thinking just school board meetings where parents confront the administration, say, "Why are you allowing boys in the girls' room?
but why
This is
haven't we
wrong."
been see, but Bob, haven't we seen videos of people being arrested or kicked out of the meetings, and heard about the FBI investigating people, and they've
Yeah,
made it very frightening even to say, I'm a parent, I don't want you doing this to my kid.
yeah. Well, that's their tactic. They're trying to intimidate people. They know every time they do some absurd arrest of a parent, it's they're making an example out of them. But parents have to brush that off. They have to realize there are some powerful legal organizations on the side of the parents, like Alliance Defending Freedom or Liberty Counsel. Those are great organizations. I mean, the Liberty Counsel in particular takes on all comers and was going after the COVID-19 lockdowns long before anybody else.
Now that
Uh,
word
and
may
the
get us
and the
banned. I
military.
have to say we were banned once before, so I hope this one gets to stay up. But
Oh,
the,
well,
the
look,
the thing
they've
is,
reversed the COVID mandate, and now I think that one thing the Republican House has said they're going to do is reinstate people in the armed forces who were thrown out because they wouldn't obey the mandate.
well, we'll
I
see
think
how
that's
that
long
goes.
overdue.
We'll see how
That's
that
long
goes.
overdue. It's just justice. You talk about justice, that's justice.
And are you optimistic about the courts upholding these rights?
Uh, Somewhat, not completely, because as we mentioned, they threw out the D. James Kennedy lawsuit against Southern Poverty Law Center when I think they had a clear case of defamation against them. But that more of these cases are going to come up, and I think like the Christian artist who makes uh, wedding invitations, I guess, and uh, the Jack Phillips case, Masterpiece Cake Shop, established that some of the authorities had an animus against him because of his Christian viewpoint. But so they decided narrowly in favor of him, the Colorado cake baker. That wasn't enough. What they have to do is establish that it's wrong to discriminate against uh, faith owned uh, businesses owned by people of faith who don't want to be forced to convey a message that they disagree with. And there's some great precedents. Look at the St. Patrick's Day parade case a few years ago when and this was a David Souter opinion, I believe, wrote and said, you can't force the Irish St. Patrick's Day parade to accommodate people who don't share their views. That's forced viewpoint adoption, and that's not what the First Amendment's all about.
And
So there are a lot of precedents like that.
do you think that there's sufficient um, interest in the elites to preserve the First Amendment? Because you see more and more articles saying the First Amendment's a bad thing. It's dangerous. It causes people to feel harm and threatened and so forth and so on.
Yeah, those people are barbarians. First Amendment is our bulwark in this country. It's the envy of the world. It's allowed us to have a free press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. I mean, it's really at the heart of how America came to be. And for them to attack the First Amendment is to attack America itself and the whole idea of individual freedom, freedom of conscience. well, these people look like fools, and then they are. And I
Well,
think
you
they'll
say
be
that,
revealed. It's so
they
stupid.
seem to be having an incredible effect in different organizations, which have different speech codes and rules and I mean, even the thing we're on now, we're worried about somebody taking us down. You know, who would think in America you would talk to somebody about something and somebody could ban you?
Okay, well, a more direct and short answer is for people to read chapter 1 of the book of Romans in the New Testament.
Okay.
That's where the Apostle Paul says men who will forget God. When they do that, they will listen only to their own appetites, and they will engage in perverse behaviors, and they will try to silence anyone who disagrees with them, and that they will become completely oblivious to the truth and basically become unhinged, insane. And I think we're seeing that. It's that bad today. Some of these elites, the things they're proposing, uh, this group in Southern California, is it that it's a college, is banning the word field. Did you see that, Larry? They had an
Yes.
excerpt in the Wall Street Journal. They
Yes.
don't like the word field, like go out and work in the field, or go to a field office. They say it's reminiscent of slavery. I'm thinking, field? I mean, what, a baseball field? Do you think nobody but slaves ever worked in a field? And it's not inclusive. And they go into all this newspeak about how racist it is. And I'm thinking, this is insanity. And people are seeing through it. I see a great revolt here, Larry. I don't know about you, but more people are rejecting the insanity because it's being exposed.
You say that on an
The book of
individual level,
Ephesians
but
says
can't you still be
exposing the deeds
punished?
of evil. What?
Can't you still be punished? You say, I reject it, but then
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
says, okay, you can reject it, but you're not working here anymore.
Well, that's happening still. And to a large degree, it's happening. That's why we need groups like Liberty Counsel and the ACLJ. That's the American, well, it's the answer to the ACLU, and Alliance Defending Freedom. And the it's really too bad the ACLU, which is supposed to stand for free speech, is all too often on the side of the suppression of speech.
Well, it's
Every
interesting.
so often they get it
The
right.
ACLU defended communists and Nazis, but
Yeah,
they won't defend Christians.
and
So it's
pro-lifers.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a little funny there, and you have to ask. Perhaps their commitment isn't to civil liberties, but again, civil liberties was simply being used as a tool, and
Well, they use the Constitution against constitutional liberties. You know, they cite the First Amendment in order to destroy safeguards like decency laws.
hold that thought because we're just coming up on 40 minutes. I'm going to sign off and we'll start a new session. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay.